The wheat fields of Reno County, Kansas, do not forgive easily. They hold things frost, seed, drought, silence. And on a brittle January morning in 2005, they held something else entirely. The last known footsteps of a young woman named Lisa Marie Garner, age 29, who walked out of her farmhouse on Hatcher Road just after 6 in the morning and was never seen alive again. The date was January 14, 2005. The temperature that morning hovered at 11 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky was the pale gray of old bone, and a thin layer of ice had formed overnight across the gravel driveway, the kind that crackles underfoot like something being broken. Lisa's husband, Dale Garner, age 34, a grain elevator operator at the Hutchinson Co-op, told authorities he last saw his wife standing at the kitchen window, cradling a mug of coffee, watching the dark yard. He said she had seemed quiet. He said he thought nothing of it. By 9 o'clock that morning, Lisa's vehicle, a 1999 Dodge Caravan Silver with a cracked left tail light, sat cold and unmoved in the driveway. Her coat was still on its hook by the back door. Her boots were still on the mat. Her 2 children, Cody, age 6, and Haley, age 4, were still asleep in their rooms, and Lisa Marie Garner was gone. The question that would haunt investigators, neighbors, and the people of Hutchinson, Kansas for the next 17 years was not simply where Lisa had gone. The question, the one that deputies wrote down in their notes, the one that Lisa's mother asked every single morning of her life until she could not ask any more, was this: how does a woman in 11-degree weather walk out of her own home without her coat, without her boots, without her car, and simply cease to exist? To understand what happened to Lisa Marie Garner, you need to understand the world she lived in. Reno County in January is a place stripped of softness. The grass dies back to bare, tan stubble. The roads run long and flat, cutting through fields that seem to go on until they simply become the horizon. The nearest grocery store from the Garner property was 11 miles east on US 50. The nearest neighbor was a retired farmer named Glenn Porters, who lived 3/4 of a mile down Hatcher Road, and who, by his own account, rarely heard or saw anything from the Garner place unless the wind was blowing just right. Lisa Marie Garner, born Lisa Marie Kohler in Pratt, Kansas, was the kind of woman people described in contradictions. She was, according to her sister, Renee Kohler Walsh, quiet but funny, the type who would sit in the corner of a room and then say one thing that made everyone stop and laugh. She had met Dale Garner at a harvest festival in Nickerson in 1997. They married 18 months later in the summer of 1999 in a small ceremony at her parents' property. By 2005, they had been married nearly 6 years, and those who knew the couple well had noticed, in the months preceding January, that something between them had shifted. Renee would later tell investigators that her sister had seemed withdrawn. She had stopped calling as often. When she did call, she chose her words carefully, the way a person does when they suspect someone might be listening. Dale Garner was by all outward appearances unremarkable. He was broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, the kind of man who fixed things himself and didn't say much when he didn't have to. His coworkers at the elevator described him as dependable. His bowling league teammates, he bowled every Thursday night at Meadowlark Lanes on Plum Street, said he was a decent bowler, a quiet drinker, and a man who laughed at his own jokes a half-second before he finished telling them. Nobody disliked Dale. Nobody would have pointed to him in a lineup. January 13, 2005, the night before Lisa disappeared, was a Friday. Dale told deputies he came home from work at approximately 5:15 in the evening. He said Lisa had made soup, vegetable, beef, and that they had eaten together at the kitchen table with the children. Cody had spilled his milk. Haley had refused her carrots. It was, by all accounts, Dale offered, a perfectly ordinary Friday night. He said they watched television until around 9. He said Lisa had been tired. He said they went to bed without argument. The morning of January 14th arrived with the low creak of frozen pipes and a wind from the northwest that drove the chill deeper than the thermometer showed. Dale said he woke at 5:45. He said Lisa was already up, that he could hear her moving in the kitchen below. He said he smelled coffee. He dressed for work, came downstairs at approximately 6:15 and found Lisa standing at the window, as he had described, quiet, her back to him. He poured himself a travel mug. He said he kissed her on the cheek. He said she said, "Have a good day." He said he told her the same. He left at 6:22. The children woke up on their own at 7:30. Cody went downstairs first. He later told a child advocate interviewer that he had called for his mom and she had not answered. He said he had found his little sister's cereal box on the counter and poured them both a bowl. He said he waited by the window. The swing set in the backyard hung perfectly still in the frozen air. The toy truck Cody had left in the yard the previous afternoon lay on its side in the frost, exactly where he had left it. Everything was exactly where it had been left. Everything except Lisa. By 9:15, Cody had walked across the cold yard and knocked on the door of the detached garage. He said the garage was empty. He said he did not know what to do. He went back inside and sat with his sister on the couch and watched cartoons for 2 more hours before a neighbor, Glenn Porter's, who happened to be driving past and noticed the Garner children standing at the front window staring at the road, stopped and knocked on the door. Glenn Porter's called the Reno County Sheriff's Office at 11:43 in the morning. He described the children as cold, confused, and alone. The first deputies arrived at the Garner property at 12:08 in the afternoon. The last time anyone could confirm Lisa Garner had been seen alive was 6:22 a.m., when Dale Garner's truck rolled out of the driveway and turned east on Hatcher Road. From that moment forward, the 6-hour window, 6:22 a.m. to 12:08 p.m., became the center of everything. The search for Lisa Marie Garner began that same afternoon. By 2 o'clock on January 14th, the Reno County Sheriff's Office had established a command post at the Garner property and dispatched 4 patrol units to canvass the surrounding roads. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation was contacted by 4:45 p.m. by the following morning, Saturday, January 15th. A ground search team of 63 volunteers had assembled at the Hutchinson Fairgrounds and were organized into grid sectors covering a 12-mile radius from the home. Bloodhounds were brought in from a Sedgwick County facility. The dogs, according to their handler's written log, tracked a scent from the back door of the Garner home southeast across the frozen field toward the irrigation ditch that ran along the property line, and then lost the trail entirely at the edge of the ditch, as if the trail simply ended at the water. It was too frozen and shallow to have concealed a body. It made no sense. Investigators noted it but said nothing publicly. The community response was immediate and genuine. By Sunday, January 16th, handmade flyers bearing Lisa's photograph, a school picture-style portrait, her dark hair pulled back, a small smile, had been stapled to every telephone pole and fence post from Hutchinson to Nickerson. The Methodist Church on Avenue A opened its fellowship hall as a volunteer coordination center. Casseroles arrived. Coffee urns were borrowed from the Lutheran church next door. Women who had never met Lisa Garner sat at folding tables and organized search grids because that is what people in Reno County do. They show up. Dale Garner, for his part, showed up too. He attended the volunteer meetings. He thanked people. He held his children's hands in photographs that appeared in the Hutchinson News on Monday morning. He wore the same canvas work jacket in every photograph, collar turned up against the cold. He answered questions. He cooperated. He wept or appeared to on the first evening news broadcast that covered the story. But those who knew him said something was slightly, almost imperceptibly, wrong. Renee Kohler-Walsh, who drove down from Wichita the day after her sister was reported missing, later told investigators that Dale had met her at the door of the farmhouse, and in her words, seemed more like he was managing a situation than falling apart. She described the inside of the house as unusually tidy, dishes done, counters wiped. She said she had asked Dale where Lisa kept her important documents, her insurance papers, her address book. She said he had answered too quickly, as though he had already thought about the question. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the coat on the hook, about the boots on the mat, about the fact that Lisa's purse, a brown leather tote her mother had given her, sat on the kitchen counter with her wallet inside, her identification inside, $43 in cash inside. A woman leaving voluntarily does not leave her identification. A woman leaving willingly, even in crisis, takes her coat when the air outside is 11 degrees. The timeline, once investigators began mapping it carefully, developed its own inconsistencies. Dale said he had left the property at 6:22 a.m. The grain elevator's security log, a handwritten sign-in sheet kept at the front office, recorded Dale's arrival at 7:05 a.m. The drive from the Garner property to the Hutchinson Co-op on East Avenue A, measured by two separate investigators driving at normal speed and following the most direct route, took 19 minutes. 6:22 to 7:05 was 43 minutes, a gap of approximately 24 minutes that Dale could not account for, and when asked, said he must have been mistaken about his departure time. The odometer reading on Dale's truck was noted by the first deputy on scene, a standard procedural detail, at 143,212 miles. 3 days later, when a KBI agent photographed the vehicle, the odometer read 143,271 miles. 59 miles had been driven in 3 days, during which Dale had told investigators he had not left the property, except to travel to and from the command post at the fairgrounds, a round trip of approximately 8 miles. The KBI agent who noted the discrepancy wrote in his field log, odometer reading inconsistent with stated travel, mileage unaccounted for, approx. 43 miles, no explanation offered by subject. Physical evidence from the house itself was minimal to the point of being almost sculptural in its absence. There were no signs of disturbance, no overturned furniture, no broken dishes. The vegetable beef soup pot had been washed and put away. The children's cereal bowls from Saturday morning sat in the dish rack, still damp from rinsing. The bed had been made. Lisa's side of the bed, her pillow, her nightstand with the small reading lamp and the library book she had checked out 3 weeks earlier on the topic of perennial gardening, looked, in the photographs taken by investigators, like a still life. Composed, arranged, waiting. The KBI brought in a forensic technician to luminol test the kitchen and adjacent rooms on January 18th, 4 days after Lisa was reported missing. The results were not made public. In a later court proceeding, a forensic chemist would testify that the testing had returned what she described as areas of particular interest, near the back entry and the attached mudroom, but that no conclusive physical evidence had been collected at that time due to the condition of the surfaces. By the end of January 2005, the ground searches had turned up nothing. No clothing, no personal effects, no physical remains. Lisa Marie Garner had, to all investigative appearances, dissolved into the Kansas winter. The Reno County Sheriff publicly stated that all leads were being actively pursued. The KBI said nothing. and Dale Garner, by early February, had enrolled the children in their regular preschool and kindergarten schedules, had returned to work at the elevator, and had begun the process, slowly and quietly, of resuming the rhythms of his life. The case did not officially go cold until late spring of 2005, when the KBI reassigned the lead investigator to another case. But for those involved, the file had the quality of cold long before that. It had the quality of something set down carefully and covered over. Months passed, then seasons. The wheat came up in spring and was cut in summer, and the fields went brown again in fall, and the Garner farmhouse on Hatcher Road continued to sit at the end of its gravel drive as it always had, smoke from the flue in the mornings, lights going off one by one in the evenings, the appearance of a household sustained. Renee Kohler-Walsh drove down from Wichita every 6 weeks throughout 2005. She said the visits became harder each time. She described the house as feeling altered, not physically, but atmospherically, the way a room feels different after something has happened in it. She said Haley had begun drawing pictures at preschool that her teacher found unusual. Not disturbing, the teacher was careful to note, but repetitive. A woman figure always in the same posture, arms slightly raised, near what appeared to be a car or a body of water. Haley, when asked by her teacher what the pictures were, said, "That's my mommy going away." Cody, at 6, began having what his first-grade teacher described in a note home as sleep disruptions and separation anxiety. He did not want to be left alone. He checked, according to his teacher's observation, that all the exits in the classroom were visible from his seat. He had taken to carrying a small green stone in his pocket, a piece of polished river rock that his mother had given him. He rubbed it between his fingers during lessons. For those who have ever sat with the specific silence of a grief that cannot be named, cannot be organized into the familiar stages, cannot be given a date or a coffin or a place to focus. For those people, the Garner children's behaviors will need no further explanation. By autumn of 2005, Renee Kohler-Walsh's relationship with Dale had deteriorated to the point of active hostility. She said he had begun limiting her contact with the children. He had stopped returning her calls. When she arrived unannounced in October of that year, he met her at the front porch and told her, in measured terms, that her visits were confusing the children. She said she stood on the porch of her sister's house and looked at the man she had always found slightly difficult to read, and felt, for the first time, not suspicion exactly, but its quieter predecessor. A certainty, she would later say, that sat in her chest like a stone. In the spring of 2006, Dale Garner applied for a declaration of death for Lisa Marie Garner, citing the Kansas statute that allows for a presumption of death after 1 year of unexplained absence. The application was contested by Lisa's parents, Gerald and Donna Kohler of Pratt, Kansas, who argued that their daughter's absence was not voluntary and that the filing was premature and inappropriate. The county court ultimately denied the application on procedural grounds. Dale did not refile. Gerald Kohler, Lisa's father, gave a single interview to a Wichita television station in the fall of 2006. He was a large man, quiet and deliberate, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent a long time farming and an even longer time waiting. He said, sitting in the living room of the house his daughter had grown up in, "I don't know what happened to my girl, but I know she didn't just walk away." He said it once and did not repeat it, and the interviewer, understanding instinctively that the sentence had used everything available, did not push. Donna Kohler died in March of 2009, of heart failure, without knowing what had become of her daughter. Those who attended the funeral in Pratt described Gerald Kohler at the graveside as composed in a way that was almost painful to witness. the composure of a man who has already used all of his grief on something else and has nothing left to use for the ordinary losses. By 2010, Dale Garner had sold the farmhouse on Hatcher Road and moved with the children to Wichita, to a subdivision near the McConnell Air Force Base flight path where the houses were newer and the lots were smaller and nobody knew him. He had begun working for a commercial HVAC company. He did not remarry, though neighbors in Wichita later told investigators he had had at least one significant relationship during those years, with a woman named Carol, who had reportedly ended things abruptly and moved away. The Reno County Sheriff's Office reviewed the Garner file in 2009 and again in 2012, each time flagging the odometer discrepancy and the timeline gap as unresolved. Each time, without new evidence or new testimony, there was nothing prosecutable. The file sat in a drawer in the cold case division. Outside, the wheat grew and was cut and grew again. For those who have ever doubted someone they love, held a small, terrible suspicion at a distance, and refused to look at it directly, because looking at it directly would change everything. The years that followed in the Kohler family's life will be recognizable as a particular kind of endurance. It was not grief with a shape. It was the absence of a shape. It was the persistence of a question that had no answer and no ceremony and no official end. Renee Kohler-Walsh never stopped believing something was wrong. She said, years later, that the belief had become so constant that she had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of a highway near your house. It was simply part of the acoustic structure of her life. And then, in the autumn of 2021, something changed. The trigger, when it came, did not arrive in the form investigators had spent years hopping for. There was no new forensic technology that cracked open the old evidence. There was no anonymous letter, no deathbed confession, no long-lost witness. The trigger was a conversation between a young woman named Haley Garner and a licensed mental health counselor in Wichita, Kansas, in September of 2021. Haley was 20 years old. She had been in therapy, she later explained in a victim impact statement, for approximately 18 months at that point, working through what she described as anxiety, hypervigilance, and a persistent, formless dread she had carried since early childhood. In a session on September 9, 2021, she told her counselor something she said she had known since she was 4 years old but had never had words for, or had never allowed herself to apply words to, because the words, once said, could not be unsaid. She said that on the morning of January 14, 2005, she had woken up before Cody. She said she had come downstairs. She said she had seen her father's truck still in the driveway, the truck he claimed to have left in at 6:22 a.m. She said she had heard voices in the mudroom, one of which was her mother's. She said the voices had stopped. She said she had gone back upstairs because she was afraid. She did not know, at 4 years old, what she was afraid of. She just knew to go back upstairs. Haley's counselor, following mandatory reporting protocol, contacted the Kansas Department for Children and Families. DCF notified the Reno County Sheriff's Office and the KBI on September 14, 2021. Case File 2005 RC1147, the disappearance of Lisa Marie Garner, was formally reopened. What followed was 16 months of meticulous investigative reconstruction. The KBI assigned a 2-agent team to the case. They re-interviewed 31 individuals who had been contacted in the original 2005 investigation and identified 7 new witnesses who had not previously been part of the inquiry. Among the new witnesses was a retired county road maintenance worker named Bert Ansell, who said he had been grading roads on the morning of January 14, 2005, and had seen a silver minivan, a vehicle matching the description of Lisa's Dodge Caravan, parked near the grain bins off Route 96, approximately 7 miles from the Garner property, at around 7:15 in the morning. He had noted it because the van was parked at an angle he described as like someone left it in a hurry. He had not come forward in 2005 because, he said, he had not known it was relevant. He had not known anyone was missing. The KBI also executed a search of a 12-acre property near Sylvia, Kansas, in Rice County, approximately 41 miles from the Garner farmhouse, that had been owned in 2005 by an associate of Dale Garner's from the bowling league, a man named Terry Waverly, who had since moved to Oklahoma. The search, conducted over 3 days in November 2021, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver-trained detection teams, located human remains buried at a depth of approximately 3 feet in a dry creek bed at the southwestern edge of the property. The remains were transferred to the KBI Forensic Laboratory in Topeka. On March 3, 2022, the KBI issued a formal identification. The remains were those of Lisa Marie Garner. The forensic pathologist's findings, which were presented at trial but not in their complete form to the public, indicated that Lisa had not died of exposure or accident. The manner of her passing was determined to be a homicide. Dale Garner was arrested at his home in the Wichita subdivision at 6:47 in the morning on March 7, 2022, 17 years, 1 month, and 21 days after Lisa was reported missing. He was in the process of leaving for work. He was wearing his canvas work jacket, collar turned up. He said nothing when agents identified themselves and presented the warrant. He stood in his driveway in the pale morning light, and according to the arresting agent's written report, his face arranged itself into an expression that was not shock and was not grief. It was something harder and quieter than either of those things. It was the look, the agent wrote, of a man who had been waiting for a knock on the door for a very long time. The arrest made front-page news in Hutchinson and Wichita. The Hutchinson News ran the story above the fold with the headline, "Reno County Cold Case Solved, Husband Arrested 17 Years Later." In the comment sections of local news websites, the community response fractured almost immediately into 2 distinct camps, those who said they had always known, and those who said they could not believe it, those who had bowled with Dale at Meadowlark Lanes, those who had shaken his hand at the volunteer search in 2005 and told him they were praying for Lisa's safe return. Renee Kohler-Walsh, when reached by a Wichita news station the morning of the arrest, said only this, "I need you to understand that I have been waiting for this day for 17 years, and I want you to also understand that there is no version of this that feels good." She paused. She collected herself. "She was my sister," she said. "She was 29 years old. She had 2 children. She made vegetable beef soup." Cody Garner, 23 years old at the time of the arrest, had been living independently in Wichita and working as an apprentice electrician. He did not make a public statement. Haley, whose testimony had reopened the case, gave a brief written statement through her attorney that read, in part, "I have carried this since I was 4 years old. I did not know when I was 4 years old what I was carrying. I know now. And I hope my mother knows I never stopped looking for her, even when I didn't know that's what I was doing." Dale Garner stood trial in Reno County District Court beginning in October of 2022. The proceedings lasted 11 days. The prosecution built its case on 4 pillars: the testimony of Haley Garner, the forensic identification of the remains, the testimony of Bert Ansell regarding the silver minivan, and the original investigative inconsistencies, the odometer discrepancy, the timeline gap, the absence of physical evidence of voluntary departure. which were presented to the jury in methodical, unhurried detail by the lead KBI agent assigned to the reopened case. The defense argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial, that Haley's memory, drawn from the perspective of a 4-year-old more than 16 years after the fact, could not be relied upon, and that no one had placed Dale Garner at the site where Lisa's remains were found. They noted that the property where the remains were discovered had belonged to Terry Waverly, not Dale Garner, and that no forensic connection between Dale and that location had been established. The jury deliberated for 14 hours over 2 days. On October 27, 2022, they returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree homicide. Dale Garner showed no visible reaction in the courtroom when the verdict was read. His attorney placed a hand on his forearm. He looked at a spot on the wall above the jury box. Gerald Kohler, who had driven from Pratt for every day of the trial, sat in the second row of the gallery with his hands folded in his lap. Those in the courtroom who watched him said that when the verdict was announced, he did not smile and he did not weep. He simply closed his eyes for a moment slowly and then opened them again. Dale Garner was sentenced on December 9, 2022, to 25 years to life in the custody of the Kansas Department of Corrections. He was transferred to El Dorado Correctional Facility, 60 miles northeast of Hutchinson, where the wheat fields that had kept Lisa's secret for so long were still visible, on clear days, from the upper windows of the facility's east wing. Lisa Marie Garner was 29 years old when she died. She had grown up in Pratt, Kansas, where she had learned to ride a horse in the pasture behind her parents' house and had grown tomatoes in a small garden plot she had kept since she was 8 years old. She had a sense of humor that her sister described as dry as the county in August. She liked perennial gardening. She had a library book on the subject on her nightstand the morning she disappeared. She had named her daughter Haley because she liked the idea of a name that sounded like weather, something that came and went and transformed the world around it, and then was simply part of the atmosphere forever after. What this case represents in the broader ledger of justice deferred and justice eventually found is not a story of systems working the way they should. The Reno County investigation in 2005 noted every significant inconsistency: the odometer reading, the timeline gap, the absence of a coat, of boots, of an identity document, of any marker of voluntary departure. They noted these things, and they could not, at the time, build them into anything that a courtroom would accept. The file sat for 17 years in a cold case drawer while 2 children grew up in the house of the man who had taken their mother, while a father drove to a grave each year to speak to a wife who did not have a grave yet, while a sister sat in Wichita and held a suspicion close to her chest the way you hold something breakable. And then a 20-year-old woman sat in a counselor's office and said the thing she had known since she was 4 years old and had never allowed herself to say. And everything, slowly, carefully, irreversibly, began to move. If there is a lesson in the Garner case, it is not a comfortable one. It is the lesson that absence is not the same as absence of evidence, that a question not yet answered is not a question without an answer, that the fields remember, that children remember, that the smallest inconsistency, 24 minutes, 59 miles on an odometer, a coat on a hook in 11-degree weather, can be the thread that, pulled gently and with patience and without flinching, unravels everything. Gerald Kohler still lives in Pratt, Kansas. He is 78 years old. He tends a garden in the summer. He has a photograph of Lisa on the mantel in the living room, the same school picture-style portrait that appeared on the flyers stapled to every fence post in Reno County in January of 2005. She is smiling in it. Her hair is pulled back. She looks like someone who is about to say something funny. Her name was Lisa Marie Garner, and she deserved to be found.